Hey there, it's Carolyn with another Curious Studios video, and today I want to talk about how to draw from your imagination. When I started out drawing, it was usually under my desk in high school from a bunch of photographs and magazines, preferably in math class. And it's a good starting point, but it's also not a place where you want to get stuck. You don't want to get stuck in a place where you always need a reference photo to draw. You want to get to a place where you can express your own creative voice and come up with your own inventions. And to do that, you need to make that transition from just merely copying something to truly inventing something. So how do you get there? The way you get there is by thinking of your imagination as a library. And it's your responsibility to stock this library with exciting shapes, with exciting forms, with textures, and then it's also your job to find your way around that library and be able to read any of these books that you put in there. And usually, at least for me, but I know it's true for some of my students as well, the books that are in the form section, in that section where you try to make your inventions look three-dimensional, they almost feel like they're written in a different language. So in order for you to be able to invent anything from your imagination, you have to learn that language that's written in those form books. So today's video is about how do you practice creating forms so you can draw anything from imagination. If that sounds good, let's dive right in.
One of the best ways to actually practice drawing from imagination is by drawing from observation, but not drawing from observation by merely copying exactly what we see mindlessly, but by drawing from observation in a very analytical way. So here I'm laying in my two-dimensional shapes, and now I'm exercising how do I make these flat shapes look 3D. So let's take a look at how to do this. Here I have a bunch of flat shapes and I need to introduce two elements to make them look round or three-dimensional. One of them is called plane changes and the other ones are called cross contours. So let's begin with the cross contours. Those are imaginary rubber bands that you snap across the form, and depending on if you arc them up or down or left or right, they will indicate the direction and the roundness of the item. So here I'm drawing a cross contour that goes around the circumference of this sphere, and now I'm drawing one that goes along the axis of it, and now it acts almost like a center line. So if I had a face there, I would be telling you which direction it's looking at. To do this well, you always want to be aware of the central axis of your shape that later becomes your form. Imagine this rod driven straight through the core, and we use this rod to wrap our cross contours either perpendicular to, like the eye line, or to the north and south poles of where the rod comes in and out of the form. The second element I was talking about were plane changes. That applies for more boxy, more faceted forms. So here on the cylinder, you have a clear plane change from the top to the side, or on the boxes is very obvious because of the corners. So those two elements will create the illusion of form. So in this drawing, I'm now shifting my flat silhouette into a more three-dimensional representation by clarifying where any of those plane changes are happening. Another thing I will do is become very clear on what my sub-segments are. So if I had to dissect this penguin into its sub-shapes or sub-forms rather, I would get a sphere for the head, a cone for the beak, a part of a cone for the neck, and then like a part of an egg for the body. Once I have that clear in my head, I can put wrapping lines or cross contours along each of those forms. Like here the belly is getting a cross contour. I put a cross contour along the head for the eye line and the center line. So notice how the center lines help me orient the chest direction. The head is facing slightly more to the right, the chest is slightly more centered. So those are things I will seek out, and then I look at slightly smaller forms. Like here, the wing attachment. I'm clarifying on the page where and how does the wing attach to the egg-like form. And once I have that, then I come back to internal plane changes like front of the wing to the side of the wing to the top of the wing. And I keep fine-tuning these edges until they read clearly and concisely. And I have to draw them clearer than I see them on the real object. So again, I'm not just copying, I am clarifying, and that is all the difference. And you can even use these facets then to shade them in to get more clarity in which direction the facets face. So here I'm clarifying where does the leg attach to the body. So let's think this through. If I pretended to take the leg off, what would be the attachment point like? Like if you glued the leg back on, what would be the surface where you're spreading the glue? And I draw that out on the side just for my own clarity because again, I'm analyzing when I'm doing this exercise. I'm not just copying for a final product. I'm dissecting things and then trying to translate the dissection, what I found, on the piece of paper. Now moving over to the next wing, doing the similar thing that I did on the left side, moving on to the right leg, clarifying my plane changes. Where does the leg face up, to the left, to the front, etc.? How thin is that strip of the wing that's facing forward as opposed to the part of the wing that's facing towards the body? Again, shading it in can clarify the orientation of that little panel. So here is something that's interesting. When you actually have an object that is thin, like this little leaf, you do not need cross contours. You do not need plane changes as much because they're thin as a sheet of paper. So there you can rely on your contours and leave them looking two-dimensional. So let's take a look at the cross contours that snap perpendicular around the axis of the object that we are drawing. When we have a cylinder or an egg, anything that is rounded in nature, you cut it in half, you look at the cut looks like a circle, you're dealing with ellipses. An ellipse is a circle in perspective. It's skewed. And there are a couple of rules you want to consider. The closer that circle is to your eye level, the flatter it will look. Or let's think of it in a different way. If you have a CD, you see the full circle of the CD if you hold it up in front of your face. Right there, here's your CD. And now you flip the CD so it's right in front of your eyes, but you're seeing only the edge of it. And it looks like a straight line because it's on your eye level. And then you twirl it just a little bit and it starts to open up a little bit into an ellipse. That is what you want to think about. How much of the ellipse opening do you see? Is it a very shallow ellipse because it's fairly close to your eye level? Or is it a very deep ellipse and you're almost seeing the complete roundness of it? And when you're dealing with length cross contours like here, you want to be very clear about where the north and south pole of your central axis are, because your length cross contours will originate and end at those poles. And wherever you choose to place that length cross contour will tell us this is the direction the face is looking, this is the direction the chest is facing, and then you can organize your features around it. So for example, on the penguin, I already have my cross contour in the center, and now I can use that to organize my features on it. So now the eyes look like they belong together and they're not mismatched from each other. Or I can do it on the egg too, just invent that there's a face on it and make sure that the tops and bottoms of those eyes are parallel with each other. The other thing you can do once you have your cross contours and plane changes is you can mimic them all along the form to create cross-hatching, and that cross-hatching can create tone as well as reinforce your forms. You're doing two things at once. So let's recap. We don't just copy from observation, we analyze. We analyze by clarifying what are the subforms, what are cross contours? Where are our central axes? What are the subforms? How do smaller forms attach to bigger forms? Where are those edges of those attachment points? Then you organize details around your cross contours so it doesn't look lopsided. And you can invent anything you want in that manner. So that face on that egg, I'm inventing that. It's not on there. But now I can make it look like it was there all along. And to do this well, it's all about understanding ellipses, how to make circles look like they're in perspective. And for that, I would highly recommend you check in next week where I go in depth about how to make stellar ellipses that are convincing and accurate. So hit subscribe or get on my mailing list so you don't miss it. Until then, I recommend you grab some simple objects from around your house, see if you can deconstruct them into their simple forms, find some center lines and cross contours, maybe even some plane changes, and then you'll be ready for next week. I'll see you then.